But yes,
Mm.
conceptually, there are an infinite number of universes
That,
where
that probably means that
different
there's
things
also
can play
one
out.
where you are way more successful at bagpiping.
Yeah,
There's
hopefully.
probably a universe where you made Stuart Little cry. You played so well.
Bam. Check
Take
this
that,
out, Stuart.
Stuart.
But see, that would change the whole world too, right? It's like, if a person like me just laid the smack down on Stuart. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Andrew Douglas.
I'm about 5 years late, but I got my new Chelsea boots. So I'm breaking them in. I'm breaking them in today.
Yeah, so should this be a standing episode?
No, I don't think so. I had thought about making all these desks standing desks,
There you go. Yeah.
but I feel like that would be a big commitment. And
Yeah.
then you wouldn't be sure you'd like it. And then,
Once you've done it, it's even harder to go back.
yeah,
Well, you could get one of those under the desk walker things. It's like those little
I've
elliptical
seen
machines.
those. What do
Yeah.
they think of next? God, it's people will do anything to avoid practicing their pipes, and
Yep.
they'll do anything to avoid going to get some exercise.
Yeah, speaking of which, this is a new product that I'm launching. This is the silent practice chanter. It's really good, partly because you have to imagine where the holes are, and so it
Yeah,
forces
I
you
love
to
that.
work on finger spacing.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a good practice aid. I'm going to launch that here pretty soon.
absolutely. Congratulations.
Anyway, speaking of practice chanters, a great segue. That I just helped myself out. Didn't even realize what I was doing. Speaking of practice chanters, fairly recently, if my editing order
By the way,
came
this
out
is
the way I
of
think it
all the
will.
possible segues, that was probably the worst one because I was
Yeah.
going with how breaking in the boots was uncomfortable, and then I was going to say something like, "Speaking of discomfort."
Oh, that's even better. You're right.
There was another one that passed us by, but you went with speaking of practice chanters.
Well, here we find
Mhm.
ourselves. If my editing order came out the way I think it will have, the world will have recently enjoyed a little bit of footage of young Andrew Douglas competing on a practice chanter.
Yes.
There's more footage of young Andrew Douglas, and
There's more footage.
If others haven't gone through the work to dig it up and enjoy it already, I've done it for you.
What
Here
kind
you
of
go.
footage is it? What kind of footage is it?
We got some footage of Andrew Douglas playing on pipes. Pipes that in the footage looks like the bass drone is about as long as Andrew Douglas is tall.
Yeah. I don't think the pipes met the 4 points of bagpipe maintenance.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe not. We got a little bit of other stuff. We got some extracurriculars here and there. My impression is that you played a little bit of t-ball or baseball or something here and there, but it was mostly bagpipes. Was it mostly
Yeah.
bagpipes?
I was a good baseball player for 1 year.
Mm.
Like my first year in baseball, I could really hit the ball. And then I kind of got the yips and I could never really hit the ball again. So then my
yips.
baseball career ended.
Man, I don't mean to totally derail this, but man, the yips, that is something I didn't know about
Yeah.
until I was reading Ruth Child's book about focal dystonia and how because thinking of it for musicians.
Yeah. So there might be a relationship there between
She says
focal
there is.
dystonia and the yips.
Yeah.
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 It's well, at least according to that thesis, it's a psychological thing, not necessarily a physical thing.
Well, I think she ties it into something neurological where it is like in your mind, but it is affecting your nerves physically and causing them to tighten up or go loose. There's a couple different manifestations she suggests. But I have a brother-in-law who's a pretty serious baseball player.
I think it's Charles Barkley. If you're interested in observing the yips, have a Google for Charles Barkley's golf swing.
Why did I think Charles Barkley played basketball?
He does, but he also famously has, I think, geez, and I always talk about stuff I don't know about when I'm live.
That's
on a
what
podcast.
we do, yeah.
But I'm pretty sure, and see, now I'm curious. Charles Barkley golf swing, here it is. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's bananas. Yep, it's Charles Barkley.
And he gets real yipsy with his golf swing, huh?
Yeah, his whole body like changes shape, and his practice swings are perfectly fine.
But then when he steps up to the tee, that's interesting.
It's crazy though. Like he's a professional athlete. Wait till you see it.
Man, I almost don't want to see it, honestly, because part of like reading Ruth Child's book about it and talking with my friends who have focal dystonia, listening to Victor Wooten talk about what it's like to have it.
Victor Wooten has it?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Isn't that wild?
Is that recent?
No, he was one of Ruth Child's like star students. He had the cramp up version of it. So like he talks about how he'd be playing and his left hand on the fretboard would just like, it would tighten up so much that it would even pop off of the fretboard. He would just
That's horrifying.
That. Yeah. I used to only be afraid of having my hands crushed or chopped off in some kind of accident. Now I have to be afraid of like my brain attacking me too. So
there it is.
anyway, a segue now. You got the yips with the baseball, but
kind of, not really. I mean, I just
right,
couldn't hit the ball.
joking around, yeah.
Like nothing bad happened to my body. I just couldn't hit the ball that well anymore.
But the focal dystonia wasn't attacking your piping, so you carried on with piping as a young man.
Yeah, well, I don't think I had a super long career ahead of me in baseball, if you know what I mean.
I read somewhere on the internet that allegedly, according to someone who claims to have been there, when you were 7 years old, you got your first practice chanter as a birthday gift and 1 lesson, and thereafter did not show much interest.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about this. Playing the practice chanter is pretty difficult. If you're trying to get a low A or a low G, it's usually pretty tricky. And so as a 7-year-old, unless you're really interested in doing it.
And have weirdly big hands.
Which is funny. My son James can do it. He's only 7. He seems a little bit interested in it. And then my daughter Hannah's actually doing a little bit of legit bagpiping right now, and she's doing really well, which is fun.
That's exciting.
We'll see. We'll see if they're interested or not. But yeah, I just don't think I was interested really yet. I mean, I think I was interested the way that a 7-year-old might be. So that seems like a cool toy. And that looks pretty easy to do. And then the moment you realize it's not easy at all, you probably immediately lose interest, right?
You look at a different toy across the room and go get that instead.
Yeah. Totally.
But that same person who claims to have been there says that then around your 8th birthday, you asked for another lesson and didn't really stop after that.
Yeah, it probably corresponded to the Syracuse Highland Games, Syracuse Scottish Games, because that would have been in mid-August each year. So, and we would always go as a family because the whole Douglas family was, especially at that time, involved in the games. My father's uncle used to paint all the signs for the games. He used to play bass drum, like old school painted signs.
Yeah, that's super cool.
He was a sign painter, and so he used to do that for the games. And he used to paint the little pipers and Highland dancers with the hole in the head.
Oh, so you could stick your face there?
Yeah, he used to do all that. But I think he was on the board or on the committee for the games for a long time. And then when I was that age, my dad would have maybe been doing his brief stint back in the Syracuse Kilty pipe band, famous pipe band from Syracuse. And then eventually we moved over to the Mohawk Valley Frasers because they had they had a serious competing organization.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Mohawk Valley Frasers because I was under the impression that your dad played with them also, or was it just you and your brother that had joined that band?
No, not really. So I think that once I was really clearly showing interest, that's when we made the move over to Mohawk Valley Frasers because there was upward mobility, lots of it actually. It was a great incubator of piping and drumming talent, really, if we're being honest. And at that very exact time that I sort of was developing an interest, the Mohawk Valley Frasers and the Syracuse Scottish Pipe Band were beginning a collaboration that was to become known as the Oren Moore Pipe Band eventually.
Yeah. That's where that pipe band comes from.
Yeah, at the very same time all that was going on. And I think my dad, who was an excellent player, was interested in that as well. And then he was good friends with Jim Clough, who was the sort of pipe major and leader of the Mohawk Valley Frasers. So it all kind of came together that way.
The way that I first knew of the Mohawk Valley Frasers, just the name for that pipe band, is that I watched every video that Michael Roddy put on YouTube repeatedly.
Yeah.
And realized after a little while that I could pretty well date the chronology of his videos based on how worn out his Mohawk Valley Frasers t-shirt was that he was often wearing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that made me start wondering, well, who is this band? Like, why is he supporting them so? So I gather you guys knew each other in the early days there in the band?
A little bit, although not a lot. Although I was telling you an interesting bit of trivia that Michael Roddy and I have something very interesting in common. And then Mike can let me know if I'm not exactly correct here, but I'm pretty sure that we both had the exact same person teach us in the very beginning, because I think Bruce Douglas, aka my dad, was his teacher. Now, I don't know if my dad was his absolute original teacher like he was for me, but yeah, I remember Mike used to get lessons from my dad quite a bit. It was a bit later. I think I was already kind of off in college, and then I remember like listening to Mike a couple times.
Like you come home from college and there's this kid taking lessons from your dad.
Yeah.
Turns out that's Michael Roddy.
And he was really good too. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet he was.
Really
yeah,
excellent.
That's super cool.
Yeah, there's a couple of other pipers out there who have been taught by my dad. Yeah. But Mike's got to be easily, he's got to be easily the second best.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, you almost said something there, didn't you? You almost said he was the best.
If he is second best, it's only by a small margin because he plays some amazing music, right? And he's got I've heard him play with his trio just recently
Yeah.
on a few clips, and it's bananas. He's an amazing piper.
Yeah, a Rise and Go. If anybody
Yeah.
needs some great music, they make some great music.
I highly recommend. I know have you chatted with him on Droning On and stuff?
He was on Droning On a while
Yeah.
ago. Yeah, it's probably been
Nice.
a couple of years now, but yeah, it was good.
Yeah, and just shout out to the Mohawk Valley Frasers, who was and still is an amazing pipe band organization that keeps it going, and they always have tons of learners and out there playing a lot of gigs in the community, competing well, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And speaking of that band, and is maybe particularly the era when you and then Michael were in the band, Jim Clough, you mentioned.
Keep in mind, Mike would have been years later.
Years later, yeah.
At least a decade later than me.
I was assuming that Jim Clough would still have been the pipe major when he went through, but maybe that's not the case.
When Mike went through?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, basically, yeah. And Jim Clough still plays in the band.
Oh, really? Oh, right on. Well, I kind of want to tug at that string a little bit because, I don't know, I've heard it brings to mind competing theories of how history happens. Is it specific individuals are in the right place at the right time or have particularly strong wills, and those individuals make the flavor of the day and make the policies of the country and make the wars happen and all this stuff? Or is it more like organic movements amongst many people? And maybe it's a combination of the two. But I'm curious, maybe looking specifically at Mohawk Valley Frasers. And maybe it's not fair because probably a lot of individuals have been involved and it'd be hard to remember all their names and give them credit. But at least your impression, looking back right now in this moment where I haven't given you time to think about it, is it that Jim Clough was a really good pipe major and that meant it was a really good band and that led to all the other good things? Or is there a lot of other stuff going on?
Well, it's funny you should ask that, and you are putting me on the spot. But my knee-jerk reaction to that is absolutely. So obviously a lot of amazing players, and then Donald Lindsay has to be a name that comes to mind as well. So
which one? There are so many Donald Lindsays in piping.
I'm talking about the Donald Lindsay, Donald F. Lindsay.
Okay, you got to include that middle initial to make it clear. Yeah.
Around here, that's the Donald Lindsay for sure. Yeah. Not to be confused with Donald W.G. Lindsay, is it?
Yep.
Yeah, but Donald Lindsay comes to mind as well as somebody who, I don't know if this is the episode to talk about it too much, but sort of miraculously. In a miraculously cool, rare way. I was talking about the collaboration between Syracuse Scottish and Mohawk Valley Frasers, but they were kind of like rival bands. I don't think they hated each other. I don't think it was like that, but they were rivals. And the question who should lead came up, and rather than fighting about it, they famously, miraculously invited famous piper Donald Lindsay down from the mountains, down from
his hermitage.
Yeah, well, down from the mountains of Petersburg, sometimes known as Petersburg, to basically lead the band because they sort of needed a neutral third party who also happened to be a great piper and a great teacher as well. So I was right there. I witnessed the very first year of the band, and then by the second year of the band, I was like a young fledgling player in the Oren Moore pipe band, which was pretty darn cool. But even then, Jim Clough was always there in sort of the supporting role as an excellent piper that could help improve the pipe corps and help get the pipe corps in tune. But he was also just a phenomenal organizer. And he kind of reminds me of people like Ken Eller and Jim Sim and some of these guys that we know. Joe McGonigal's another name that comes to mind. Robbie McNeil is another from the West Coast. Just people who lay down everything to make sure that piping and drumming is successful, like ceaselessly work for that. He's kind of one of those. And so without Jim Clough, I think things for me would certainly have been different. Certainly. I mean, I don't know if I don't know if you could say I wouldn't have been successful or anything like that, but it would have been vastly different.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I don't know what I want to be the case, you know what I mean? Because it takes a lot of work to run a pipe band. And so you got to have a large supportive group of people to make it sustainable, at least for a lot of us. But there are those individuals out there who seem to be able to they can really make it happen. And that makes me feel like, well, is that what we all need then? Do we all need an individual in our community who can keep the pipe band rolling?
I think certainly if you look closely, there are those those gargantuan people that they're not just really good pipers and stuff, but they also behind the scenes are doing 10 magnitudes more work than anyone else just to see it over the goal line.
Well, hats off to them following your chronology, at some point, your parents were sick of you and decided to send you to boarding school, right?
Yeah, that's not exactly how it went.
Is it not? I just
No.
assumed.
So there wasn't really much sending. So I was essentially recruited.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So the St. Andrews College, I don't know, school, St. Andrews College, sort of. It wasn't just a boarding school. There were day students and stuff north of Toronto. They recently hired Jim McGilvery to sort of take over the piping and drumming program. So St. Andrews College has a huge cadet corps. Basically I think actually everyone in the school is part of this cadet corps. But it's not a military school though, but it's just like this ceremonial thing that they do at the school. And it's an interesting way to develop discipline and hang on to traditions and spend a lot of money on uniforms.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, the pipes and drums at that time, which would have been the mid to late 90s, right? At that time, that kind of felt like it needed to be revamped. And then and then this guy, Jim McGilvery, would occasionally come over and use the chapel to practice in. I might be butchering this story, or maybe he played a few gigs at the school or something. And basically push come to shove, and they realize they have one of the best pipers of all time 2 blocks away from the school. And so they start to talk about revamping the pipes and drums and so on and so forth. And anyway, I was kind of the result of them hiring Jim McGilvery and then also saying, hey, we'd love to have a student that's an excellent young piper actually come to the school and sort of be the poster child, for lack of a better word, poster boy for the new revamped program. And then Jim knew me through the Invermark schools, which were put on by Donald Lindsay. Right. So you can see how it all kind of connects. Yeah. But I knew Jim through those schools. And then he approached my parents and just started talking to them about the possibility. Then my parents approached me later to see if I would be interested in such a thing. And I was like, wait, I get to move to Toronto and just get lessons with Jim McGilvery 4 times a week. That sounds pretty awesome. Let's do that.
Bye, Mom and Dad.
Yeah, it wasn't that bad though. So I was maybe 4 or 5 hours away from home.
Yeah.
At boarding school. And so I would be able to go home regularly, and it was great.
Cool. Now, your brother was older than you, right?
Younger.
Oh, younger than you. Okay. I was imagining a real strong rivalry developing where, little Andrew's getting all this bagpiping attention. So I just like to imagine drama.
Well, my brother's an excellent snare drummer.
No.
And so at some point later, a few years after I went, he came to the school as well and played in the drum corps. And we both got a really nice secondary school education.
Actually, speaking of that, it's probably hopping ahead chronologically a little bit, but I did find that a recording that you made when you were leaving school. You would have been about 18 years old from, I think it was while you were at St. Andrews. That I don't know. I'm not trying to come across as if I didn't expect it to be great, but dang, Andrew, it's pretty dang good. That recording, not only is the playing great, but also the recording quality is really good. It just sounds good.
Yeah. Are you trying to say I've aged poorly? No.
What happened? What happened since then?
What happened? Was it with you? I was talking about how Jack Lee used to ridicule my D throws.
I do. That does sound familiar. And speaking of Jack Lee, did you meet him while you were at school there?
So hold that thought about Jack. So when I was in 12th grade, so sort of like a senior there, we did a big recording project in Doug Stronach's studio. So we actually recorded the pipe band, which was really good by that time. I was in the band, but there were so many really good student players in the band then. My roommate, Patty McGrath, was a really good piper. It's just too bad he had other ambitions in life. He would have been a great piper. Merv Frame, Hugh Dowell, who actually still plays around the scene and is excellent piper, was in the band then. There's a guy named Eric Davies, Merv Frame. I don't know if I mentioned him already or not, but these guys were really good players. If you sent them out to play solos, they would have definitely won grade 3 contests, and some of them would have done pretty well in grade 2 contests and stuff. And there were some pretty good drummers too, and my brother was in the band at that point. So we had this really nice band. So we went in the recording studio and recorded a CD and everything. And I did a little solo on that. But anyway, fast forward to at some point, Jack Lee got a copy of the CD or something or whatever and was listening to it. And my solo came on and he was just that was awesome, except for all those D throws in there. And he was ribbon.
No way.
I remember specifically.
That recording specifically?
Yeah.
Because I was just listening to it last time. I was like, this is really good. Like, I did not notice a single D-throw thing. So I guess that shows the way I'm not Jack Lee.
It was just funny. I mean, Jackie does everything. However he was doing it was in a very nice, well-meaning way.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I went off to boarding school and I was in 8th grade. And that very same year, I qualified for the first time for the Nickel Brown Chalice competition.
And tell me, I've heard the name of this before. There are a lot of competitions I hear the names for floating around, and I don't really know what they are.
Yeah.
What is this one?
Well, this would be a contest named in the honor of Bob Brown and Bob Nickel, like famous sort of Pibroch legends, and great solo pipers from Scotland. But it's a grade 1 invitational competition. And I don't know if Nickel Brown or George Sheriff, I don't know which one came first, but they're sort of like parallel contests. And I'm not even sure that first year I got the invite to the George Sheriff. But anyway, as fate would have it, after having just turned 14, I won the Nickel Brown, and the judge that day was Jack Lee. So that's where I met Jack Lee.
And had he already, no, he wouldn't have heard, the album didn't exist yet at that point.
No, the album was like 5 years away still, Yep, and so that's where I met Jack. And then he did start teaching at the Invermark schools in the years after that as well. So
by the time he was criticizing your recording, you knew each other.
I was already in the band.
You guys were like buddies by then.
I was already in the SFU pipe band then.
Yeah.
Because one of those years at Invermark, Jack approached my mom and myself and talked about how if we were ever interested in spending some summers in British Columbia, they would be interested in having me in the band. At which I was like 16 years old, but I was like, please, Mom, can I go? Yeah. Please, Mom, that kind of thing. And so that's how that chapter of my piping trajectory started as well.
But Andrew, 8th through 12th grade, that's a long time for
5 years,
to be going to a school where piping is part of your curriculum.
Yep.
Did it figure into that curriculum in a pretty big way?
Yeah,
like
so
2 classes a day before and after school? No. What kind of thing was it?
It was probably like 3 classes a week. Something like that.
But especially for a kid, when you've got time for practicing stuff, that probably was a lot of piping, yeah?
Yeah, well, and then we also had pipes and drums rehearsal once a week, and I don't know. I feel like there was a lot. There's also a lot of time in your dorm room where the practice chanter's just sitting nearby and you're horsing around and doing stuff. But yeah, it wasn't actually extreme. It wasn't actually an extreme amount of piping, but it would be difficult to overstate like how obsessed I was with piping.
Obviously, I'm the normie here, and so I'm not trying to compare our experiences. I think I've mentioned, I think I've brought it up before on the show here. I've certainly thought about it. That I happened to be lucky to go to a school. I lived in a town as a kid where the high school had a pipe band, and so I didn't live it as much in those formative years. But I also had a bagpipe class during the day and after school rehearsals and stuff like that. And I have thought before about like my friends who have come to it as adults and learned. And just, I didn't realize then how lucky I was to be learning it at that time, if for no other reason than because of the time availability. Like you're describing that, like there was time when I was sitting around, and so I could play pipes a lot more. Exactly. Whereas a grown-up, you just don't have as much sitting around time. No. It just does not seem fair. You know?
Yeah, and if you are sitting around, you're basically nodding off.
Totally. So as soon as you sit still, you fall asleep. Yeah.
Exactly right.
So it just seems like this lucky twist of fate, and I wish I could share that experience with my friends who are also into piping who didn't get that chance, you know?
Yeah, I would be surprised if any of the great players didn't have very similar stories, right? In the sense that it's what you were obsessed with when you were a kid. Have you ever noticed that anybody that's really great at something, are there any exceptions to the rule that they were obsessed with it when they were kids?
That's a good point. And even if there are exceptions, it's probably a situation where the exception proves the rule because it's such a rarity.
Right. Or it might have been a lack of awareness, right? Matt Fraser, who's a legendary CrossFit athlete, he was a weightlifter. He was sort of obsessed. Yeah. He was sort of obsessed with weightlifting when he was younger. And so CrossFit wasn't even invented at that point, probably, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? But just whatever he was obsessed with when he was a kid, that sets you up if you're going to become great at something.
It's maybe not exactly the same thing, but it does make me think of this. I've heard before that Yo-Yo Ma, the famous cello player, that his dad said something about how you need 3 generations to make a musician. And his take on it was that you need 1 generation to leave poverty, and you need another generation to go to school, and then the generations thereafter can become musicians.
Yeah.
And then maybe it's not exactly the same thing. And I don't mean this at all to be discouraging to somebody who didn't have the chance to be obsessed with piping as a child. Obviously, you can still get really into it. It's just like something about like acknowledging or recognizing privilege or how lucky I was, that kind of thing, you know. And,
for sure. Well, and I'm a third generation piper.
That's got to be a big deal. Imagine
Give or
that would be
take.
something.
Give or take. And then you can sort of picture the lineage of the teachers and like how that all sort of comes together and culminates too, right? But yeah, and then also what you're saying, it points to the thing, doesn't it? It points to the thing, which is that there's only one reason to play bagpipes, which is because it's fun.
Yeah.
And if you're playing it because you think you're going to become great at it, that's a tough thing. And I'm not saying it's impossible, but the likelihood, there seems to point to a pattern, right?
I think it also maybe speaks to the value of immersion as well, especially the multi-generational thing.
The immersion, right? It's not the fact that Yo-Yo Ma, it's not his genetics. It's the fact it's the fact that he would have been immersed at a young age. And so was I. But like somebody like Callum Beaumont, right? He's not a third generation piper. I don't know if he's first or not, but certainly his dad's not a great piper or anything, but he was immersed from a young age. And
now watch, Callum Beaumont's dad is going to turn out to have been a piper his whole life, and he's sitting at home right now just like, oh, not a great piper, huh? Dang it.
No, well, I know Hamish pretty well.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Yeah. By the way, he knows enough to talk about my piping. Yeah. I used to stay with Callum and James for the silver medal and stuff like that. I used to stay with them in Scotland. And yeah, there was a lot of amazing talk going on in the household in a fun way, Yeah. But yeah, Hamish would always be like, well, it wasn't as good as James, but it was pretty good. If he heard me play.
If you could clean up those D throws.
Yeah. Freaking James Beaumont. Hats off to him though. What a guy. But anyway.
That's a note of hopefulness, right? Where it's like, if the immersion is important, we can all get immersed no matter where we're at in life. Sure. Dive in and that'll help.
Yes, exactly. Immersion combined with some obsession will probably turn you into a pretty good player.
That's the formula. Immersion, obsession, and a little bit of time to dig into that.
But that wouldn't always be healthy, right? I mean, it ended up being compatible with my life trajectory, but you can sometimes see it where it's like, yikes.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's the healthy kind of obsession.
Yeah, I have some of those. It is interesting to me, Andrew, to think about parts of your story where like there are so many, and I'm not trying to downplay your ability on the instrument or anything like that, but like I think it's interesting to think about how there are parts of our identities that might be a matter of chance in a lot of ways, where like I think of when I was younger and I maybe luckily happened to pull off a good joke in the second grade and made the class laugh and then internalized this idea that I was a class clown, and that became part of my identity forever. And if I hadn't had one successful joke, maybe that wouldn't have been part of it. Yeah. And there are some students who maybe get praise on a science assignment or a math assignment, and it stands out in their mind in a way that becomes formative to who they are. And man, what if you hadn't won the Nickel Brown? What if you'd gone that far and hadn't won? Would it have had an effect? Yeah.
Who knows? It was definitely a fork in the timeline, wasn't it? Yeah, who knows? Or what if I just played poorly for Jack instead of played really well?
Yeah.
I don't know. I like to think it might have course corrected, right? If I just had a bad day that day, it probably would have course corrected because I got to know Jack at the Invermark schools where I would have done a lot more playing and he would have become more familiar with what my capabilities were beyond just what I performed at the Nickel Brown and stuff like that. But yeah, you never know. That's a good question.
You're into stuff like string theory and things like that. Isn't part of string theory like the two worlds idea that like, maybe those aren't inherently connected, but that like every possibility does play out. It's just that you're conscious of one of those possibilities playing out. There's some alternative universe where all of these other things did happen.
Correct. No, I think that's the best explanation of
everything.
That's the best explanation of like, of quantum physics.
That's why I was thinking it had to do with strings, huh?
Yeah, I'm not sure it does have to do with string theory, but it sounds like you're talking about
just moving toward the quantum level of things. I think that's probably
Everettian quantum. Yeah. I wouldn't say I'm into it, but I'm definitely interested in that whole thing. Yeah. But yes, conceptually there are an infinite number of universes.
That probably means that there's also one where you are way more successful at bagpiping. Yeah, there's probably a universe where you made Stuart Little cry. You played so well.
Bam. Check this out, Stuart. But see, that would change the whole world too, right? It's like, if a person like me just laid the smack down on Stuart, there probably would not be an Inveraray district pipe band. So that would be worse.
Yeah, that would be worse for the whole world. That's for sure. Well, so Andrew, what do we extract from this little journey down memory lane? What's like some valuable things that we can maybe apply to our piping, our leadership, our relationships, etc. going forward? Do you think?
What is it? The 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon?
So, I don't know if I've heard of that before.
You've never heard of the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon?
I feel like I should have. I went to the same high school where they recorded Footloose, so I should know everything about Kevin Bacon.
Why doesn't that surprise me? It's like a very organic place to film the story of Footloose.
The Lehigh Roller Mills is where they held the dance. I drive past it all the time. It's right here close to me. Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
So it's like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. I think the basic premise is anyone you talk to within 6 connections to other people, you get to Kevin Bacon.
I love that. Okay. Yeah.
You sort of have it in college basketball too. There's always the 6 degrees of Jim Boeheim. Jim Boeheim's a famous coach of the Syracuse Orangemen. And anything in college basketball within 6 degrees, you get back to Jim Boeheim.
So who do we get back to in piping? Who's
it's
within 6 degrees.
I think where I was going with this is it's the 6 degrees of Jim Clough. Like any successful piper from the northeast of the United States, it was probably within 3 degrees of Jim Clough. Whether they know it or not.
But Jim Clough, I hope that Jim won't be at all offended that not a name that I know alongside Gordon Duncan. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so what does that mean?
He was an excellent player. So he was an excellent player and an excellent teacher. So there's that. But like to your point, it probably never reached legendary status. But but these are the people that work at it. When they get the ball over the goal line.
I guess that's part of, maybe it's an introspective thing that I'm just trying to meditate on myself now. I'm just thinking, well, if Jim Clough has that big of an influence on that many people and yet not the celebrity status that I, a random person over in Utah, I hadn't heard his name before. You know what I mean? It's like, there's obviously a lot of value in what Jim has dedicated their life to.
Yep.
It's not all the flashing, it's I don't know. I start thinking about this, and I also back up a little bit and go like, all right, yeah, of course, like fame within this niche community. It's not all the glory of.
Yeah. Well, it begs the question, why do you do it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's only one reason to do it. It's because it's a lot of fun and you love doing it. I think that's right. I could become, what did we say? I'm going to, in some other universe, I put the smack down and destroyed Callum Beaumont and Stuart Little on the field of bagpiping battle. But even in that universe, who would really care in the grand scheme of things? There's only one reason to do it.
Because it's fun.
Because it would be fun to lay the smack down on those guys. But in this universe, extremely unrealistic.
Yeah. So you got to have fun with whatever is realistic.
Yeah. So you got to have fun struggling to make their pipe bands.
Yeah.
That's all you got.
Or in my case, you just got to have fun listening in awe, watching their YouTube videos, and then playing my pipes in my backyard.
Yeah, and then you never know, right? You just got to enjoy doing it, and then you never know what. You might be surprised what kind of opportunities come along as a result of just enjoying something a lot.
That's a hopeful message to end on. I like that a lot, Andrew, especially because then whatever opportunities do or don't come along, you still enjoyed it. That's the thing. No one can take that away.
Well, and then on the dark side.
Bring it on.
On the dark side of this conversation, it's like, how many of us are suffering because we didn't take the time to enjoy the things that we love?
Oh, man. Yeah.
Instead, we went for the thing that we don't enjoy, but was supposed to bring us lots of success.
Which so often doesn't even bring us lots of success. So then
that's
it's like
my
this
whole point.
Double negative. Yeah, double emptiness.
It's like the classic Jim Carrey story. I think he was giving a speech at some college. I think it was about Jim Carrey's dad who loved performing, and I think he loved, maybe it was comedy. I don't know, maybe he was like a stand-up comedian or something.
I have heard this speech as a commencement speech or something.
No, but I think he quit the thing that he loved doing in order to become an accountant or whatever and have a successful job. But then a few years later, he got fired from that job, and they ended up kind of like in a slightly desperate situation. And then Jim Carrey's point is, you can fail at the things you don't want to do. So you should focus on the things that you do. Maybe. I don't know. But that's maybe the darker side of the conversation.
No, it's worth thinking about, yeah.
And at some point, you probably have to make hard decisions, but But yeah, if you're in the position to enjoy piping, I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
Because you never know what kind of like cool opportunities or experiences might come as a result. You're going to leave it there, aren't you?
I think it's a pretty good ending. I think it's pretty good.
Hey everybody, Andrew Douglas here from the Piper's Dojo, and I just want to say thanks so much for listening to today's iteration of the podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard here today, it would be super helpful to us and to a lot of bagpipers out there trying to find us. If you could give us a top-notch review on whatever platform you're using to listen to this podcast, particularly Apple, iTunes, and Spotify and things like that, your review would be really, really helpful. So if you have a moment today, definitely go over there and help us out. Other than that, until we meet again on the podcast or somewhere else, thanks again for listening.